Okay, so let me begin by thanking JNU ACADEMIC for this opportunity and congratulating Professor Nanda for writing such a compelling book. That many of us have had this critique of post-colonial, but you bring all the argument together, and it's been really a compelling book that I read in one sitting, except for your last chapter on. I avoided. I did not have patience to sit to read Rajiv Malhotra and others. And the
You missed something.
I think the structure of the book somewhere resonates with Richard Wallin's book on Seduction of Unreason.
Oh yeah, Wallen. But
Yes.
I wasn't consciously following him.
Following, yeah.
I've read him, but no.
But you do cite him, I think, in your
I do,
introduction.
I do,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Richard Wallin makes a very similar compelling case in terms of taking post-structuralism and the convergence with fascism.
Right.
And he makes the same celebration of unreason, which is common to both post-structuralists like Foucault and Derrida. And he says fascists all over the world mobilized very strongly around this idea of questioning rationality, reason, and enlightenment. So I think we are completely together on that. But I would take this occasion to raise a few issues that can make your case more complex.
Please.
Because you make a very compelling case to critique post-colonial. But I think, as Gramsci would say, if we have to decimate someone, we have to do at their strength, not at their weak point. So what is the strength that post-colonial scholars tend to draw? What is the attention that they are trying to draw? Is that in any pre-modern society, the question is that we are pre-modern, right? In a pre-modern society, how do you bring those ethics of modernity, which is so compellingly agree with, right? Scientific temper, individual rights, constitutionalism, question of equality, dignity. So, I mean, that's I think the key complex area where we can take post-colonial seriously, because that's their concern. And I think that differentiates.
legitimate concern.
It's a very legitimate concern, precisely. And I think that's where we need to differentiate post-colonial concern from that of the Hindu nationalist concern. Because Hindu nationalists don't have that concern. Yeah. Hindu nationalists wish to reify the hierarchical imagination in traditional worldviews, right? And that's the point. But when you come to post-colonial, I think the case is slightly complex, and that's where I felt your book very quickly kind of reduces one to the other. Why do I say this? Because going back to Gramsci, Gramsci, when he talks about, he has a similar concern, right? How do you make a revolution in pre-modern societies? Right. Europe went through revolution, but Italy did not, England did. One of the things Gramsci talks about is the question of common sense, right? And in one of those things he talks about, when he breaks down the idea of common sense, he talks about religious common sense. That subaltern do have religious common sense, and Gramsci uses this common sense in a double-edged manner, right? That on one hand he says common sense is this fragmented, self-contradictory, confused set of ideas, but he also says that there is a fulcrum of good sense within common sense. So to make any politics democratic, now I'm making a kind of a stretch to accommodate what post-colonials are hinting at, and I feel that this is where one has to build a critique, a proper critique of post-colonial, is that to make any transformative process democratic, it needs to be organic in the Gramscian sense. That first we need to connect to the way popular beliefs, in popular language, in everyday conversations, the colloquial usage of terms and concepts need to be taken on board. Otherwise, the problem would be a scientific revolution that you seem to be suggesting would be a top-down status project. The only way that we can avoid this from being a status project, that's what we have witnessed in world. In course of getting into modernity, either you go the passive revolution way or you go the South Asian way, where you have an authoritarian state, right, through planning and you push through. So if you want to avoid, I think post-colonial somewhere have this concern, that if you want to avoid both the authoritarian Southeast Asian model or the European passive revolution model, then you have to take the subaltern consciousness seriously. Subaltern consciousness as it exists. The problem, of course, with post-colonial scholars is, as you said, it comes from the Romantic tradition. Therefore, there's a cult of subaltern there. I mean, they tend to eulogize everything that comes, which I feel is the Badrolok upper caste guilt that is at work. You'll have to concede everything that a subaltern does. Otherwise, who are we to condemn the subaltern, because we don't share their lived experience? So that's where the guilt comes from, and that's where they begin to exaggerate, create a cult of subaltern, exaggerate a lot of romantic view of a subaltern. But the point that we need to extrapolate, leaving around the exaggeration, is that how do you take on board this given sense of consciousness that as it exists with its contradictoriness, with its self-contradictions. That's where I think this whole question of myth and mythology becomes important for post-colonial scholars. That they tell you that reading myths, reading mythologies, taking it seriously gives you an entry point into popular consciousness, the way people think, the way people tend to relate to each other, what are the popular ways. Well, so that's where I would argue that if we take this part of the project of post-colonial still serious, because part of it which you do, because of which you do refer to post-colonial as left, because you do think that there is a democratic transformative element concerns they have which distinguishes them from Hindu right. It's a different point that Hindu right kind of appropriated. There has been this uncanny double, as Nancy Fraser would say. There's an uncanny double that emerged in the current political conjuncturing. That's a different matter. But I don't think we would be good in completely collapsing the two projects. I think the heart of the post-colonial project, though it went the Hindu right way, the Hindu nationalists are today more comfortable with the kind of language they're offering of community, culture, bounded communities as against, associational individual rights. I think is this question of that, how do you make this project democratic? I think that is the current context which we are also politically witnessing today in terms of populist authoritarian regime, is that populists resonate through the popular categories they use, through the category of community, through the category of civilization, through the category of myths, mythologies. So I think this resonance with the subaltern needs to be taken very seriously. That actually buttresses your point that there is no autonomous domain of the subaltern. Subaltern ways of thinking are the bourgeois elite ways that they do draw from there. So once you concede that point, that there is no radical subaltern, that we have a conservative subaltern culture, especially in what Ambedkar says, graded society of graded inequalities, right? So I think it's a very complex process in South Asian societies to transform. So a quick dismissal of this complexity might also land us in the kind of critique that post-colonials project. That's where I think science, law, constitutionalism then by default becomes an elite project. That because you tend to be dismissive of this. One is to understand, the other is to completely endorse. I think the problem with post-colonial theory is that they collapse the two. Yeah. They understand something, but they eulogize and reify it so much, which is, as I said, I'm making anthropological comes from there, but had there been not Bhadralok, I think post-colonial scholarship would have been very different in the take. That one needs a critical engagement with the subaltern. One does not have to patronize. Right. That's why in a very point which you also make, that it's it ends up with kind of reverse Orientalism. You completely reify there, completely start eulogizing all the rubbish that subaltern does. One doesn't have to do that. One has to critically engage with subaltern. One doesn't have to patronage, one doesn't have to completely endorse what they do. So in this critical engagement, I feel is something completely missing in the post-colonial project. I think your book could have come somewhere there. The fit in terms of how do we make a case for radical transformation through critical engagement. I think this is the key question we are looking at today, because post-colonial and Hindu right, you're right, in one sense converge in this point that both kind of resonate with what's happening on the ground. And I think that resonance we need to take seriously, but both end up with a conservative project, post-colonial of a different kind, but Hindu right certainly of a very visible kind of very social conservative project. So the question that therefore should interest us today is that how does this project look politically? That you critically engage, but it's radically transformative. It's not an easy. I think a lot of bulk of scholarship, whether you see Rudolph's, whether it's Franz and Frankel, whether Third Way, I think the entire Gandhian experiment was something of this kind. That Gandhi felt that there is some kind of a civilizational collective sensibility, deeply bounded, community sense in Indian society. Therefore, how do you bring social transformation without destroying that communitarian sense? So I think that idea of community basically means a kind of common bonds, an emotional bond between individuals within a community, that you find a deep sense of belonging. That's how communities are defined as against associations, which are very loosely created kind of. So community has, in this sense, I think post-colonial scholars foreground that idea. So how do you take that on board? And that, I think, for me is the key question of current times, that how do we take on board this sense of togetherness, the sense of belonging that we have in our cultural ethos, if we think we do have something of that kind, then how do you marry it to a modern constitutional project? That, are these really the way Europe went? Obviously was, as post-colonials rightly point out, in terms of some idea of destruction of community and replacing it with abject atomistic individualism. And that's why Gandhi says, liberal modernist way of bringing question of equality has resulted in alienation and anomy. That wonderful essay of Bill Graham I keep quoting, I think fully captures this point very strongly. So my first question would be that, do we not have to return and take this part of the post-colonial project still seriously, dropping out, washing out their eulogization, romanticism that is born from the Bhadralok guilt? I think we need to sieve through and separate these two projects. They themselves have done a bad job of it, but we can still pick the strong part of the political project of post-colonials and see. You want to say, let me complete? I have, you'll have your time.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. Because this is a compelling case where Nanda takes on Nandi. So I'll have to have my say in terms of completing my points, right? Similar is, point on secularism, where you make a very strong case for secularism, and you are an upfront critic of Nandi's idea of secularism in terms of, his whole dismissal of the secular state. But again, the question comes back to this in contemporary times. You make a normative point that state needs to be secular. Elites need to have a secular outlook. The question that we are facing, Professor Nanda, today is, what if elites abjectly reject that project? Which is clear with Trump, what he does. That now there is not even a fig leaf left. Elites are not even trying to cover themselves up down there. It's about when to take Greenland, right? So there is no question of, backing out. So when that happens, what is the alternative? How do we take on the elites? How do we take on the class question? How do we take on the question of power? When power has become so naked, that's where do you still think that by returning to this project, there is something that we need to explain about the constitutional secularism in the Indian context? Because if you look at it, it looks quite a strange case in the Indian context, that if we consider constitutionalism the way post-colonials do as an elite project, then we'll have to explain why would right-wing groups want to subvert constitution. If we did not have a transformative project, why would constitution? But if we go the other way around, the constitution is a social revolution of its time, like Ambedkar said, then one would have to still ask a question from the other end of the spectrum, that why is constitution not a popular discourse in Indian context? So you cannot today go to elections by saying that I will defend constitution. I mean, Rahul Gandhi has been trying, but I don't think he'll succeed. That simply saying that I'll Samvidhan Bachao cannot be a popular electoral issue, right? So we'll have to explain this strange case, this unicorn animal from both ends of the spectrum. That there is a case where an elite-based political formation like Hindutva is wishing to subvert the constitution, and there is other end of the case where constitution does not become a popular document. Therefore, within the modern constitutional discourse, you have these two interpretations. You have the Rohit Day kind of people's constitution. It has always been part of people's public discourse. But that also looks like a fairly exaggerated case, because if that were to be the case, then when it is so clear that constitution is being subverted, then you'll have subaltern stand up. But people are not doing that, right? People don't bother so therefore constitutionalism, Ambedkar may be part of popular consciousness, but constitution as a vision, constitutional vision, and as Ambedkar himself said, constitutional morality has to be constructed, it is not given in Indian society. Therefore, I think both secularism and secular constitution, I think, have to be, to understand the social character of these institutions, we'll have to understand them from both ends. That right is somewhere uncomfortable with them, with popular subaltern not appropriating them. So there is a very strange no man lands case for constitution and secularism. That's why many of us struggle where to locate ourselves vis-a-vis these things. I think Nandi was very clear in saying constitution is an elite because of scientific temper, and he links it with industrialization, so on and so forth. The third point you make, especially of Nandi's, that ahistorical greatest attraction, he says, about our civilization, it is that it is a 2 minutes, yes, that it's ahistorical, and Nandi makes this, I think the forgotten double is that the essay where he makes that point that, he says the greatest attribute of this civilization is that we have an uncanny ability of forgetting and forgiving, which you take on very directly. But again, this is a very interesting, what is attractive about it is the fact that he is questioning the non-instrumental mode of. So I would ask you a more direct question, that what would your position be on instrumental rationality? Because from Heidegger to Habermas, we do have a critique of Western modernity around this principle of, and that's what science is based on. Therefore, bringing that into social ethics, an instrumental ethic. What is the other ethic? I mean, Habermas talks of communicative rationality. So we'll have to then extrapolate that their critique of science is valid to this extent, that instrumental rationality has colonized the life world to this extent. I think that
is my thing.
That we'll come to that. So that's the Nandi's concern. As far as the concern is that instrumental rationality, does it lead to erosion of community as we imagine it? So that's, I think those are the outlier questions that we have. But
these are all very, very important questions. There is one thread that seems to be connecting all of them. Is that we have something very precious in our traditions, and what every time people say individualism, they add atomistic to it. I'm sorry, that is that. Secondly, it is assumed. It is just assumed that the subaltern must love their community. It is just assumed that breaking free the experience of anonymous urban life is not liberatory. This is Bhadralok's own attachment to their upper class. Ask women, ask bloody,
anonymity of urban areas.
We are assuming that when you say that transformative process have to be organic, you are asking too much. Can you make an omelette without breaking an egg? You can't. I'm not going Stalinist. I'm not. All I'm saying is to demand that we change. That is actually, in fact, what you have pointed out is lies at the heart of post-colonial and Indian nationalist thought. Yeah, reform, yes, but within the tradition. And what if the tradition doesn't? And what if the tradition has strict limits? Raja Ram Mohan Roy wants to get rid of burning women. So he says, nahi, widows ko sadhu ki tarah rehna hai sari umar. Right? Because Manu mein likha hai. Why would I not question Manu? My point is, transformative through organic processes have certain limitations. In a scientific revolution, you cannot, you overthrow the existing paradigm, both methodologically and its description of the world is overturned. You are expecting, yes, keep the, I see your point, I really do. Key idiom of the ordinary people, use that to bring about, what if the idiom is inhospitable to freedoms? Because I was reading the polling data, this business of, we keep on saying that Modi government is authoritarian, it is imposing censorship. If you read the popular polls, they want the censorship. In their universe, it is not good to be talking against your elders. It is not good to be, you have to be देश भक्त हो तो तुम देश का criticism नहीं कर सकते. This has wide social, how do you change it through organic processes? But should I defer to the organic processes, organic idiom, if it has such strict limits, and secondly, what I think that reason and question of authority is also a part of subaltern cultures. So we treat them with such kid gloves, There's idealized subaltern who's so fragile, who's so wedded to their Puranic way of being. Are they? They work hard to send their children to modern schools. They take loans to have their children educated in engineering colleges which pay no returns. It's so sad. तो कैसे हमने सोच लिया कि वो तो जो उनकी traditions हैं उससे वो इधर उधर नहीं जाना चाहते. We are making too many assumptions about the subaltern here.
Closer to the mic, please.
And and you had secularism. My critique of is a bit radical. I think the kind of secularism in the best Nehru idea of Sarva Dharma Samabhav, and the state shall have no religious identity. I think it just doesn't go far at all. It doesn't go too far at all. It is unsustainable as long as secularization of the mind, by which I expressly mean Weberian disenchantment, demagification. Why? Because this is the peculiar nature of Hinduism, in which supernatural is built into nature. We are a pantheistic, vitalistic. Vedanta ends up pantheism, कि कन कन में भगवान है. So what happens with that is social practices from and our knowledge systems get closely entrenched with the physical reality of supernatural acting in nature. So, and our traditions get justified as written into nature, because God is in nature. I mean, caste doesn't require it's not like a case of the sermon or somewhere or some kind of जो Christians में charter or sermon and 10 commandments वाला चक्कर नहीं है. हमारे यहाँ है कि you are born like that. You are born because you are born in a certain womb, and that you are born in the certain womb because you've done something. And these are making claims on nature. The claim is कि nature works this way, कि तुम जो करोगे वापस तुम्हें मिलेगा. Our metaphysics makes assertions which are on the domain of material nature. They are therefore perfectly. They must be criticized. Must be. I think that is what Ambedkar wanted. That is my experience. That in India, liberalism requires a serious critique of Vedanta, because it naturalizes injustices. So uske liye disenchantment is my point. My thing is Nehruvian secularism only tried to create सबका equal without separating. And even that, it doesn't go far enough. It does not do the wall of separation. B, this business of equal respect for all actually promotes religiosity of all. It has no. एक तरफ से कहते हैं promote scientific temper, but this business of equal regard, state will support all religions. It is actually a very pro-religion document. And pro-religion is not even-handedly pro-religion. It's very clear. So my thing is, even this business of sarva dhamma, sabhi ek barabar hai, government nahi karegi. Even for that, you require a secularized mind. Because if you think your God is like the be-all and end-all, why would you not treat your religion like it's a matter of life and death? You see what I'm saying? Unless there's some distance between God and your everyday life. That's what Weberian sense of disenchantment is. And that doesn't mean that I'm only arguing for instrumental rationality. Instrumental rationality is means ends. That is only one component of, and to think, as Nandit says, that we have been like, is India dominated by means and ends rationality? No. I mean, they're making statements without, no society, that is the mistake Frankfurt School made of this kind of an extreme rejection of collapse of modernity into instrumental rationality and then condemning the whole business together. No society is, human beings being what they are, they seek both what is true, what is good. We are moral beings. So science doesn't exhaust itself, and especially in a modernizing society like ours. Science has an unfulfilled potential for what Habermas called bringing about a communicative, for bringing about disenchantment, for secularizing the mind, for questioning the presence of you. I mean, I am a non-believer, but at least remove God from कि ये magic possible. जैसे Hume का critique of miracles, India में कहाँ है? And miracles are a real fact of everyday life. The people are exploited in the name of miracles. There is no, why can't that sort of a thing? Scientific reason has untapped potential for making our lives, subaltern lives better. So anyway, I'll end here. This can go on, but you have raised absolutely important points, and I do need to think about the organicity issue. But anyway, we'll end here, I guess.
Thank you so much to the panelists.